4 decades, 80 muscle cars that aged terribly. In 2025, these are the ones you should avoid at all costs.
Everyone talks about 60s muscle cars like they're gold, but some are just old junk now. In 2025, these once-loved legends sit unsold and unwanted, so don't waste your money. Number 20, 1968 AMC Rebel SST. It once ruled the streets, but now nobody wants it. Back in 1968, the AMC Rebel SST was supposed to be something special. It had a cool new look, fun V8 power, and even a soft top that folded down. But now in 2025, this car is sadly one of the most worthless muscle cars of the 60s. Let me tell you why. First off, the Rebel SST was AMC's last real convertible. That sounds cool, right? But wait, there's a reason they never made another one after this. AMC was already struggling back then. In 1967, they lost so much money that they almost went under. By 1968, they were trying to make a comeback. But here's the truth. Nobody really wanted the Rebel. Even though it came with a V8 engine, a sporty steering wheel, and fancy seat features, the Rebel SST couldn't keep up with muscle cars from Ford or Chevy. People could just spend a little more and get something way better, like a Chevelle or a GTO. Here's what made it worse. The base model 550 was dirt cheap, only $2,736. It was the lowest priced 6-passenger convertible you could get. That sounds like a deal, but it came with a weak 6-cylinder engine, plain looks, and almost no power. Even the fancy SST version couldn't save it. And guess what? AMC only sold 823 Rebel SST convertibles. That's tiny. That tells you how little demand there was. By today's standards, these cars are hard to fix, slow on the road, and don't have much value at all. Parts are rare, and engines are outdated. Nobody's collecting them anymore. It may look fun in photos, but it's all downhill from there. Number 19, 1969 Ford Torino GT. The 60s muscle car is worth less than a used blender. With its fastback shape, racing stripes, and powerful V8 engine, 1969 Ford Torino GT looked like a dream on wheels. But fast forward to today, and this once-loved muscle car is now one of the most worthless cars from the 60s. Here's what went wrong. At the time, the Torino GT came with a matching 3-speed automatic and a 302 cubic inch V8 engine. It had power steering, power brakes, and even an underdash 8-track player. Today, nobody wants to deal with outdated tech like 8-track players or old AM/FM radios. Most of these features don't even work now, and if they do, fixing them costs way too much. Also, the engine sounds tough, but it guzzles fuel like crazy. With gas prices higher than ever in 2025, that big V8 becomes a big problem. Here's the next issue. The Torino GT might look fast, but it's really just slow compared to modern cars. A base SUV today could beat it in a race, and good luck stopping quickly with those old drum brakes. Let's talk parts. Finding pieces for this car is like hunting for treasure in a junkyard. The bucket seats, center console, GT hood, and those dual exhausts, they might look cool, but if anything breaks, it could take months and lots of money to fix. Paint looks good in pictures, but many of these cars have faded or cheap repaint jobs. Add in rust on the frame or under the doors, and things get ugly fast. That's why in 2025, the 1969 Torino GT isn't a smart buy. No speed, savings, and support. It might seem like a deal, but honestly, this car is better left in the past. These cars are worthless, sure, but not more than what's coming up. As we go further down the list, the truth gets harder to swallow. And just wait for number 1, because you probably thought that car had something special for everyone. But today, it has nothing. Number 18, 1967 Dodge Coronet 440. Don't buy this muscle car, even for free. In 1967, the Dodge Coronet 440 looked like a solid pick. It had clean lines, a big block engine, and plenty of choices for buyers. But not now. Let me explain why. Back then, Dodge offered a wide range of models: Deluxe, 500, 440, and even the powerful RT. The 440 came with a 383 cubic inch V8, which sounded great. But here's the problem. Dodge never made the 440 model with the bigger 440 cubic inch engine from the factory, even though the name says 440. That confuses a lot of people and hurts its value today. Let's move to reliability. Old wiring causes major problems. Many of these cars had charging issues and weak lights. Unless someone like George completely rewires it, you're stuck with low voltage and bad connections. In today's world, that means your lights flicker, your fans run slowly, and your car might not start. Here's another issue. Air conditioning systems are either missing or not working. Modern replacements are expensive. Most people just skip it and drive with the windows down. But in hot weather, that's not fun at all. Now let's talk parts. You can't find much for this car. Special trim pieces, interior parts, or factory badges are rare. If the dash breaks or lights go out, it's not easy or cheap to fix. Even the LED taillight upgrade George made was a custom job. That tells you how hard parts are to find. Also, these cars are heavy and slow by today's standards. The bench seats and steering feel old. Fuel mileage is terrible. That's why in 2025, the 1967 Coronet 440 just doesn't make sense to buy. It might look nice, but owning one brings more problems than it's worth. Number 17, 1968 Mercury Montego MX. You won't believe how badly this car aged. In 1968, Mercury Montego MX had nice colors, shiny trim, and came in many styles like a hardtop, sedan, convertible, or even a wagon. But this once-loved car is now one of the most worthless picks from the 60s. Here's where it all goes wrong. First off, the Montego MX was built to feel upscale, but it never really stood out. It didn't have the muscle of a Chevelle or the fame of a Mustang. It was stuck in the middle, not sporty enough, not truly luxury either. That hurts its value today because collectors usually want bold cars, not forgotten ones. Now let's talk about power. The Montego MX had some V8 engines, sure, but they weren't the best of the bunch. The ride was soft and the handling felt heavy. Driving one today feels more like steering a boat than a car. Turning corners is slow, the brakes are weak. Here's another problem. The parts are rare. If something breaks, like the trim, dash, or steering parts, you'll be stuck searching or paying way too much. These cars are hard to restore because they weren't super popular and few people saved the parts. Now think about comfort. Back then, things like air conditioning and FM radio were options. But now most of those features don't work or need replacing. That means more money just to enjoy basic stuff like cool air or music. Also, the Montego MX was heavy. It burns way too much fuel. Today, people want cars that save gas, not drain it. Number 16, 1966 Chevrolet Chevelle 300 Deluxe. It was hot in the 60s, but ice cold in 2025. Sure, 1966. Chevrolet Chevelle 300 Deluxe looks shiny now with fancy wheels and a loud engine. But let's talk about the problems that come with it. First off, let's look underneath. Many of these cars were born with a 194 cubic inch inline-six engine and a 2-speed Powerglide automatic. That combo was slow even back then. Even if someone swaps in a 383 cubic inch stroker V8, like in one newer build, you're still left with an old frame and old bones. No matter how much is added, it's still not worth the cash today. Now think about the cost. That fancy suspension, 20-inch wheels, Wilwood brakes, leather seats, and Bluetooth sound might sound exciting, but when you add all that in, the car becomes too expensive to enjoy. Most folks don't want to spend sports car money on an old car that started life as a low-trim model with a rubber floor and split bench seat. Let's not forget the interior. The original versions had plain vinyl and basic knobs. Even with upgrades, it's still a small, narrow car inside. Parts are hard to find. If the dash breaks or the chrome trim goes missing, it's a hunt. And the ride, even with updated parts, it's stiff and loud. The custom exhaust is fun for 10 minutes, but annoying after 20. Most people today want comfort and quiet, not rattles and noise. That's why the 1966 Chevrolet Chevelle 300 Deluxe, even rebuilt with shiny paint and power, just doesn't hold value in 2025. It costs too much, rides too rough, and has never had the reputation of the true muscle cars. Better to leave it in the past. Number 15, 1969 Plymouth Satellite. It looks like this car is not more than a money pit. The 1969 Plymouth Satellite has a wide body, shiny trim, and big tail lights that scream vintage. But once you look a little deeper, the shine fades fast. To begin with, let's talk size. This car sits on a 116-inch wheelbase, which makes it feel clumsy on tight streets. Parking is tricky, and the car doesn't handle turns well. Even with bigger engines like the 318 or 383 cubic inch V8, the Satellite still feels slow by today's standards. The smaller six-cylinder engines barely move it at all. Now let's look inside. The seats were foam or vinyl, and most had bench seating. Some fancier models had bucket seats, but even those don't compare to what's found in cars now. The heater and glove box were considered features, but in 2025, those are just basic. Air conditioning was rare, and so were power windows or modern radios. Driving one today feels more like sitting in a noisy metal box. Next comes the value. People want Roadrunners and GTX now. Those were the stars. The Satellite, even in sport trim, is mostly ignored. It had a chrome strip here, a badge there, but nothing that stood out. There were over 38,000 hardtops sold, plus thousands more in sedans and wagons. Because so many were made, there's nothing rare or special about most of them today. And finally, the upkeep. Finding parts is not easy. Many are no longer made, and the ones that exist cost a lot. Even a simple repair can turn into a long wait and a big bill. Add in bad gas mileage, heavy steering, and clunky brakes, and it's just not worth it anymore. In 2025, the Plymouth Satellite is better left in old photos than in your driveway. Number 14, 1965 Ford Galaxie 500 XL. The 1965 Ford Galaxie 500 XL used to be cool, but now it costs a fortune to fix. It had chrome trim, long, wide doors, and cool bucket seats. It even had a V8 engine under the hood. Let's start with the size. This car is huge. Parking is a big chore, and driving in traffic is stressful. With stacked headlights and sharp edges, it looks nice standing still, but it drives like a boat. It floats over bumps and leans hard into turns. Even with its fancy NASCAR-built suspension, it still feels clumsy on modern roads. Now think about the engine. The 289 cubic inch V8 only made about 200 horsepower. That sounds fun, but it burns gas like crazy. And today, gas prices are higher than ever. Some models had the bigger 427 engine, but it's rare, hard to fix, and not even allowed on the road in some places due to new emissions laws. Then comes the inside. Sure, it had a floor shifter and padded seats, but the seats are low and uncomfortable now. There's no touchscreen, no backup camera, and no airbags. The Galaxie 500 XL even lacks power windows in most trims. The Cruise-O-Matic transmission shifts slowly, and the radio only works if you find old AM stations. Let's not forget parts. Fixing a Galaxie is tough now. Few shops know how to work on them, and replacement parts are hard to find. Chrome trim costs a lot, and broken trim is nearly impossible to match. Even little things like ashtray lights or fake walnut panels can break and ruin the look. For collectors, it's just another big Ford. For drivers today, it's a problem on wheels. The 1965 Galaxie 500 XL may have charm, but it has no place on today's roads. Number 13, 1968 Pontiac Tempest. The 1968 Pontiac Tempest, despite its long hood and unique bumper taillights, today it's just not worth the trouble. Back then, it came with some neat features like rear armrests with ashtrays, a deluxe steering wheel, and even an anti-theft buzzer. The Sprint version had a stronger 250 cubic inch overhead cam, 6-engine with a 4-barrel carburetor and heavy-duty shocks. Sounds good, right? Well, not anymore. First of all, this car is heavy and slow compared to today's rides. Its 6-cylinder engine tries hard but can't keep up with modern cars. The bigger V8 options are rare and expensive to fix. Plus, the gas mileage is terrible, and gas prices have climbed a lot since the 60s. Next up, the handling and ride are far behind. The Tempest suspension was okay back then, but it feels rough and floaty now. It doesn't hug corners or absorb bumps like newer cars. Driving it today can be tiring and even unsafe on busy streets. Not only this, the vinyl seats wear out quickly, and there's no modern technology like air conditioning, power windows, or safety airbags. The small details like the ashtray and buzzer don't make up for what's missing. While it once had charm and style, the 1968 Pontiac Tempest now only serves as a reminder of the past. Number 12. 1966 Dodge Polara 500. Rust problems and no value. The 1966 Dodge Polara 500 might seem like a fun, shiny old car. It has big bucket seats, chrome trim, a sporty black top, and even cool knockoff-style hubcaps. But if you look closer, there are some big reasons to skip this one today. For starters, this car has a reconstructed title, which means it was damaged badly enough in the past to be labeled not safe for the road. In fact, it was once driven through water, which can cause rust, wiring problems, and all kinds of hidden damage. Even though it was fixed up, that title still follows the car forever and makes it hard to sell or insure. Next, let's talk about the body. Right away, the red paint job has a few dry spots and Bondo patches, especially near the rear. That's not good for people who care about clean, smooth panels. Also, the convertible top may not even be original. It's stretched oddly and has signs that it could be a cheap replacement. That makes it hard to trust how long it'll last. Inside the car, things get even trickier. The odometer says 33,924 miles, but nobody can prove if that's true. Plus, one of the clocks had to be unplugged because it drained the battery. Not exactly reliable. Under the hood, the 3-speed automatic transmission isn't even the correct one for the car. It's from a different year. That hurts the car's value even more. Even with shiny chrome and space race looks, the problems keep adding up. Between the mismatched parts, unknown mileage, water damage, patched up body, and rebuilt title, the Dodge Polara 500 has lost its worth. Number 11, 1969 Buick Skylark Custom. The 1969 Buick Skylark Custom lost its muscle now. First off, this model was always stuck in the middle. It was not sporty like the Grand Sport and not plain like the Special. That made it hard to stand out. Even back then, most people skipped over it for better options. Today, it gets overlooked even more. Here's the real problem. Buick gave the Skylark Custom a name that sounds special, but it came with a 3-speed manual transmission as standard. For a luxury car, that was odd. Most buyers paid more to swap in an automatic. Now, when you see a Skylark Custom, it often has aftermarket parts like floor shifters that don't match the soft bench seats. The mix of sporty and soft makes it feel confused, not classy. Back in the day, only 8,188 convertibles were made. That might sound rare, but rarity doesn't always mean value. These drop tops often came with low-end V8 engines that didn't excite buyers then or now. Even worse, Buick tried to mix things up with hidden styling tricks like fake side marker lights and semi-covered rear wheels, which turned off many buyers. Some called it a weird Chevelle, just because it shared the same platform. Many cars from 1968 to 1972 still show up at car shows, but this one hardly does. That's because the Skylark Custom never had a strong fan base. In 2025, collectors don't want it, parts are hard to find, and resale prices are weak. Number 10. 1967 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. The 1967 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme is history and not the good kind. Have a closer look, and the cracks start to show. The car was one of only 502 made with the Turnpike Cruiser package, which sounds special until you realize what it really means. Instead of power and speed, it was built to save gas. With just a 2-barrel carburetor on a 400 cubic inch V8, it was all about low emissions and fuel economy, not muscle. Now here's the truth. It was sold as a high-speed highway car, but today no one wants that soft performance. Most collectors are looking for big power or sporty looks, not a cruiser built for gas savings. Even worse, this one used a 2.56 Posey rear end and a dual-pitch TH400 automatic transmission. Not exactly built for fun. So, in today's world, it feels slow and out of place. Let's go underneath. The floor pans have invasive rust and need work. That means expensive repairs. And even though the car sits on a strong 442 frame, the surface rust is creeping in fast. While some parts were upgraded, like the front sway bars and suspension, these don't boost value. They just keep it going a little longer. Now move inside. The air conditioning doesn't work because it's been disconnected. And although the interior is clean and original, the old R12 system is hard to fix and outdated. It also has a mix of factory and aftermarket radio parts, which doesn't help resale. Well, rare does not always mean valuable. This Oldsmobile has become a car that collectors skip and drivers don't want. Number 9. 1964 Dodge Dart GT. It once seemed like a smart buy. Back in 1964, the Dodge Dart GT was cheaper than most other sporty cars. It cost about $400 to $600 less than similar GM models, and even underpriced the Comet by a few $100s. That made it popular then, but today that low cost doesn't help its value. Let's start with the engine. Most Dart GTs came with a 170 cubic inch slant 6, which just didn't have enough power. A faster V8 engine was added later that year, but only a small number of people actually bought it. Out of nearly 50,000 GTs sold, just 1 in 4 had the stronger 273 cubic inch V8. That means most of them are still slow today, especially when trying to drive on fast highways. Now look at the body. Sure, it had a solid unitized frame and fancy paint with baked-on enamel, but none of that stops it from looking plain now. The styling was only mildly changed, and while the padded dash and vinyl seats felt deluxe back then, they don't stand out anymore. Moving to the options, the Dart had lots of add-ons like power steering and tinted glass, but those features are standard in modern cars, so buyers today don't get excited about them. Even the popular push-button transmission feels outdated now. With most Dart GTs stuck with small engines, outdated extras, and no big design wow factor, the car's value has dropped in 2025. Collectors want power or rarity, and the Dart GT has neither. Number 8. 1965 Rambler Marlin. The 1965 Rambler Marlin had a sloped fastback roof like the Barracuda and Mustang, but it was much bigger. AMC thought it would be flashy and roomy all at once, but things didn't go as planned. Here's where it went wrong. First, the Marlin's shape didn't work for many buyers. It had a narrow trunk opening that made loading things hard, and the tall roof made the car look strange, even if it helped backseat headroom. When Dodge brought out the Charger just 11 months later, it had a cooler design and better appeal. Now think about the numbers. Only 10,327 Marlins were sold in that first year. Dodge sold more than 37,000 Chargers in just 1 year. That tells the story. Most buyers just didn't want the Marlin. Moving on to the engine, it did have choices. The top one was a 327 cubic inch V8 with 270 horsepower, but that version was pretty common. Over 4,000 cars had the same engine and automatic transmission, so even the best version isn't rare. Yes, it had some cool touches like disc brakes and fancy door panels, but even those extras couldn't save it. Most were scrapped long ago, and now even restored ones struggle to find buyers. Today, the Marlin is mostly forgotten and not worth chasing. Number 7. 1969 Chevrolet Impala SS. In 1969, the Chevrolet Impala SS tried to stand out, but unfortunately, this was the final year for the SS badge until 1994. Well, it disappeared for decades. That makes this model more of a leftover than a legend. Let's talk about the power. The SS only came with one engine choice, the 427 cubic inch V8. Buyers could pick either 390 horsepower or 425 horsepower. That sounds exciting, but here's the problem. It drank fuel fast and needed constant care. And now finding parts for that big engine is expensive and hard. The same goes for the heavy-duty clutches and manual transmissions that came with it. Now comes the odd stuff. This car came with features like hideaway wipers, liquid tire chains, and even a roof rack on some versions. These things might seem fun at first, but today, they just confuse buyers. Most don't work anymore, or were never really useful. Next up, the style didn't age well. The long slab sides, notchback roofline, and bulky bumpers make it hard to love today. The tall body lines and heavy frame mean it feels slow and clunky. And even though it had things like disc brakes and comfort tilt steering, newer cars beat it in every way. Then there's the 6-cylinder base version that came with some models. That was way too weak for the car's size, making the Impala feel underpowered and lazy. Number 6. 1967 Mercury Cougar base. Even nostalgia can't save this disaster. The 1967 Mercury Cougar base. One big problem is the weak engine. It started with a 200 horsepower V8 that just didn't have much punch. Even the stronger engines weren't exciting enough to stand out, especially against cheaper cars with more power. Here's where it gets worse. Most buyers picked the automatic, but it wasn't very fun to drive. Only a few had the better 4-speed, and many came with just a basic 3-speed. That left drivers with fewer choices and less control. The base model also missed out on all the cool stuff from the XR7 version, like wood trim, leather seats, and extra gauges. Let's not forget the hidden costs. Air conditioning, power brakes, power steering, and cruise control were all pricey extras. By the time people added those, the car got too expensive for what it offered. The styling may have looked good in the 60s, but now the Cougar just feels big, slow, and forgotten. No wonder most people skip right past it today. And if you think this one's desperately bad, just wait. We're only at number 6. The car sitting at number 1? It was once called the people's favorite, but in 2025, it's lost every ounce of value, and you won't believe why. Number 5. 1968 Plymouth Fury III. Once famous, now forgotten. The 1968 Plymouth Fury III is a good example of the classic that brings more trouble than it's worth today. Even with its sharp body lines and shiny chrome, this big convertible has lost its place in the modern world. One big reason is the value. Right now, a clean Fury III in good condition sells for around $12,867. But no one really wants one, and selling it can be a struggle. Here's the other big problem. Back in the day, it looked fresh. But even in the late 60s, this design was already falling behind. While other companies went with modern curves and smooth shapes, the Fury stuck with older, blocky lines. Even the quad headlights, which once seemed bold, were a reused look borrowed from other brands. Now add this. Only 4,500 convertibles were made that year. That sounds rare, but it doesn't mean people want one. The market is small, and most folks pass it by. The engines, like the 330 horsepower produced by 383 V8, sound strong, but keeping that engine running well now costs too much. As we move along, the inside was stylish once, but nothing about it stands out today. Vinyl seats and basic trim feel cheap. Buyers now want cars with more advanced features or true collector history. Sadly, the Fury III has neither. That's why today, even with a good shine, this old cruiser is stuck in the do-not-buy zone. Number 4. 1966 Pontiac Catalina 2+2. Don't be fooled, the 1966 Pontiac Catalina 2+2 is a bad deal. It once tried to be the big brother to a famous muscle car, but now it sits forgotten. The car came with a 338 horsepower, 421 cubic inch V8. An optional tri-power setup pushed it to 376 horsepower. Sounds strong, but here's where the problems start. At first, this model sold just over 6,000 units. That's not many, even back then. And because it was made in small numbers, finding parts now is tough. Even worse, by the very next year, only 1,768 2+2s were sold. That big drop shows people had already lost interest while it was still new. Next comes the weight. This was a full-size car built for size and looks, not for real speed or balance. It couldn't match the smaller, lighter cars that had better handling and cheaper prices. Even with all its power, it didn't stand out where it mattered. Another big issue? The style aged fast. The wide body and curved glass made it look bold in the 60s, but now it just looks bulky. Later models like the 1969 version added hidden wipers and flashy bumpers, but this one didn't get those. Over time, collectors moved on. They want either a rare muscle car or a truly stylish cruiser. The Catalina 2+2 is stuck in between. Number 3. 1965 Chrysler 300L. Back in 1965, the Chrysler 300L was built to be something special. With a 413 cubic inch V8 engine, making 360 horsepower, it looked like a luxury muscle car. But now in 2025, this car is one of those you just should not buy. Here's why. To start with, the numbers were always low. Only 2,845 were made, and just 400 were convertibles. Even rarer, only 108 had a 4-speed manual, and just 12 of those were convertibles. That makes finding parts nearly impossible. When something breaks, and it will, good luck replacing it. Even worse, this car came with many power features that were fancy in the 60s, like electric vent windows and a tilt steering column. But today, those systems are outdated and often broken. Fixing them costs a lot and takes time that most people do not have. And that triple blue color combo? It may be rare, but it adds no real value unless everything is perfect, which is hard after 60 years. Then comes the size. The car is huge. Parking, turning, and storing it is hard for everyday people. Add the fact that it was not restored and sat unused for years, and you get a long list of problems like leaks, rust, and bad wiring. But now it's a high-cost project with little reward. Unless you already have the rare parts and time to care for it, this old Chrysler is better left alone. Number 2. 1964 Buick Wildcat. In 1964, the Buick Super Wildcat came out swinging. But now in 2025, this full-size beast has turned into a car most people should skip. At first, it sounds exciting. It came with a 425 cubic inch V8 engine, 2 4-barrel carburetors, and made 360 horsepower. Back then, it could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 7.5 seconds. Fast for a car that weighed over 4,000 pounds. But here's where the problems start. First, very few were built. Less than 300 Wildcats had this Super Wildcat setup. That means finding original parts today is almost impossible. Next comes the price. Even fully restored models have only sold for about $36,000 in recent auctions. That's low for such a rare car, and it shows how little demand there really is. Now think about the weight. At over 4,000 pounds, it drinks fuel fast and handles like a boat. Add the outdated features and old layout, and it becomes clear. This car is all show, little go. Sure, it was fast in a straight line, but it never became a real muscle car, and it lacks the racing history or badge power others have. Also, there were no big interior changes from the year before. Buyers in 2025 want modern comfort or vintage with value. Number 1. 1966 Oldsmobile Jetstar 88. The final classic of the list. Trust me, you'll regret buying this. The Oldsmobile Jetstar 88 came with hopes of muscle and comfort. It carried the big 425 cubic inch V8 engine, offering up to 370 horsepower. To start with, this was the final year for the Jetstar name. That makes parts rare, and fewer people remember it even existed. On top of that, the car didn't bring many new changes. It kept the same engine, the same trim, and mostly the same looks as the year before. While the Delta 88 became its own model and started climbing the luxury ladder, the Jetstar stayed stuck in the middle. Even with all that engine power, it didn't sell well. These cars had a manual 3-speed column shifter standard, but most buyers didn't want those, and very few got the rare 4-speed version, making good driving examples even harder to locate. Also, there was no convertible for the Jetstar in 1966, and without that open-top style, many collectors pass it over for more popular dynamic or Delta models. Trim features were plain, and the design was already falling behind when new sweeping styles took over in 1967. So this one's best left alone.
If you think the 1960s had some embarrassing misses, wait until you see what the 1970s dragged in. These next 20 cars took worthless to a whole new level.
The 1970s were the golden years of muscle cars, big engines, bold looks, and loud exhausts. But not every ride from that time aged well. Some are now just shiny junk. These are the 20 worthless muscle cars now in 2025. Number 20. 1976 Chevrolet Camaro Rally Sport. Back in 1976, the Chevrolet Camaro Rally Sport looked like a dream on wheels. It had bright yellow paint, a long front nose, and a sporty body that made people stop and stare. But fast forward to the year 2025, and this once cool muscle car just doesn't hold up. You see, in 1975, the Rally Sport became more about looks than power. It was mostly a paint and sticker package. That flat black paint that looks so tough, it didn't age well. After almost 50 years, it fades, cracks, and is nearly impossible to keep shiny. The bumpers were painted too, which sounded fun at the time, but now they're chipped, rusty, and just plain sad to look at. The 1976 version didn't bring much change. Sure, there was a little silver trim on the back if you picked the fancy model, but the rest stayed the same. Under the hood, the base engine was a small 6-cylinder that had trouble keeping up with modern traffic. Even the bigger V8 engine only made 165 horsepower. That's less than many small cars today. It sounds like a muscle car, but it moves like a turtle. Worse yet, parts are getting harder to find, and fixing one of these isn't cheap. The brakes became power-assisted that year, which sounds nice, but by today's standards, they still feel weak. And even though these cars were popular in their time, they just don't drive well anymore. The steering feels loose, the ride is rough, and it burns way too much fuel. So it might look cool in old photos, but it's not worth your money today. Some things are better left in the past. Number 19, 1978 Ford Mustang II King Cobra. The 1978 Ford Mustang II King Cobra had a flashy name, a giant snake sticker on the hood, and wild racing stripes down the side. Only a little more than 4,000 of these were made, and they came with a V8 engine to sound fast and tough. But fast forward today, and the King Cobra is more of a show-off than a performer. Sure, it looked mean with its deep front spoiler and sporty paint job, but that was about it. Underneath all that flash was a heavy little car with very little bite. It didn't corner well, it leaned too much in turns, and it wasn't even that quick. Even back in its day, it was just barely stronger than other cars in its class. And let's talk about comfort. This car wasn't exactly smooth. The ride was rough, and the seats, especially the ones with the striped Fresno cloth, looked like they came from a fancy couch, but didn't feel that great on a long drive. The inside had pinstripes, extra lights, and even vanity pockets, but none of that helps today when most of the parts are worn or falling apart. Some versions came with a T-top roof, which sounded fancy back then, but today those glass panels leak, rattle, and cost a fortune to fix. Replacement parts for this car are hard to find, and most mechanics don't want to deal with it. The King Cobra might still turn heads at car shows, but driving it every day in 2025, not a good idea. It's a muscle car that tried to roar, but ended up whispering. In today's world, it's better left parked in the past. Number 18, 1977 Pontiac Firebird Esprit. It looked smooth and stylish. Back in 1977, the Pontiac Firebird Esprit turned heads. With its long hood, low stance, and gentle curves, it seemed like the kind of car you'd see cruising by palm trees on a sunny highway. It even came in special colors like light blue and buckskin gold, with comfy seats and shiny chrome trim. But now that calm cruiser just doesn't make much sense anymore. Under the hood, it carried a small V8 engine, barely enough power to call it a muscle car. It didn't have the speed of the Trans Am, and it couldn't match the handling of modern sports cars. Even back then, it was more about looks than performance. The ride was soft and slow. Try taking a corner fast, and it leans like a tired boat. The brakes were average, the steering felt loose, and even with things like air conditioning and power windows, it just doesn't keep up with today's world. Everything about it feels old, not charming old, just worn out. The parts are another headache. Some trim pieces like the special wheels or steering wheel from the fancy versions are nearly impossible to replace. And if you're lucky enough to find them, they cost a fortune. Paint fades, plastic cracks, and those once beautiful interiors now smell like old garages. It may still turn a few heads at small car shows, but as a real driver's car, the Esprit has lost its spark. What once looked like a movie star now feels more like a background prop. Number 17, 1979 Mercury Cougar XR7. There once was a time when the 1979 Mercury Cougar XR7 was called fancy. It had soft seats, shiny trim, and a name that sounded wild. People liked the big hood, the swooping roof, and the way it looked like it belonged in a car parade. It even had a pretend spare tire shape pressed into the back trunk lid. like it was trying to copy the big classy cars of the day. But just because it looked proud didn't mean it drove proudly. Under all that flash was a small V8 engine that only made 133 horsepower. That might have sounded good back then, but today it's about the same as a minivan. The car was heavy too, which made it slow. Press the gas pedal, and instead of jumping forward, it kind of groaned and crept along. The steering felt loose, the brakes were soft, and sharp turns were never its strong point. Even sitting inside felt like being in a living room with wheels. It was full of fake wood, thick carpets, and soft cushions. But the fun of driving, that wasn't part of the deal. The Cougar XR7 was built more for gentle cruising than action, which doesn't make it exciting today. Over time, the vinyl roofs start peeling, the trim falls off, and all those fancy touches become a pain to fix. Some parts are nearly impossible to find, and mechanics often roll their eyes at the word Cougar. What used to feel rich now feels tired. It's a big, slow cat with worn-out claws, more of a couch on wheels than a true muscle car. And that. Number 16, 1974 AMC Javelin AMX. The 1974 AMC Javelin AMX, with wide stripes, a long nose, and sharp curves, it seemed like a muscle car ready for action. People said it was different, but being different doesn't always mean being good. By the time this car rolled off the line, the golden age of muscle had already ended. Its V8 engine made 245 horsepower, but that was nothing special anymore. Other cars had already backed off the power to meet new rules. Gas was expensive, and the fun was fading. Even with that big engine, the Javelin AMX felt heavy, not fast. The inside had bucket seats and a center console, which sounded sporty. But when you drove it, the truth came out. The steering felt soft. The brakes needed effort. The ride bounced too much over every bump. It may have looked like a race car, but it moved more like a sleepy cruiser. Even the shape, once praised for being smooth and clean, now just looks bulky. That long body and sharp back end make parking a pain and turning worse. The shiny chrome and vinyl trim didn't hold up over time either. They peel, rust, and cost way too much to fix. Try to find parts and you'll learn how rare doesn't always mean valuable. Collectors might love the story, they might cheer for the underdog, but for most people, the 1974 Javelin AMX just isn't worth the trouble. Number 15, 1977 Oldsmobile Cutlass 442. It once had a name that sounded strong, 442. Back in 1977, the Oldsmobile Cutlass 442 had a sloped nose like a race car and a big V8 engine under the hood. The body was wide and heavy, with long doors and thick bumpers. Some came with fancy bucket seats and shiny badges on the side. People thought it looked cool, but by then, it had already lost its muscle. The V8 engine in the 1977 model was large, 403 cubic inches, but only made 185 horsepower. That's not much for something that big and heavy. It took more fuel than fun to move it forward. Step on the gas and the power felt tired, like it had been used up in the earlier years. The body was chunky and didn't turn well. Try to take a corner fast, and it leaned hard, like a couch on wheels. The brakes were soft, and the ride felt floaty. It wasn't built for fun roads. It was built to look like a memory of something better. Over time, rust ate away at the edges. Chrome bumpers faded. The plastic trim cracked. The once bold stripes peeled like old stickers. The doors got heavy to close. Seats sagged. Some had dents that never got fixed. Others had engines that coughed and rattled instead of rumbling smoothly. The name 442 once meant a quick and powerful ride. But in 1977, it was mostly just a name, left over from better days. It looked like a muscle car from a distance, but up close, it was more bark than bite. Number 14, 1978 Plymouth Roadrunner. Sometimes a car wears a name too big for what it can do. The 1978 Plymouth Roadrunner is one of those. Under the hood was a big engine, a 360 cubic inch V8 with a 4-barrel carburetor. Sounds strong, right? But back then, power was being squeezed away. This big motor made only 170 horsepower. That's not much for a car that tried to act like a muscle machine. It was all bark, no bite. However, the body looked flashy with bright stripes and wide spoilers, but the soul of the car was missing. It shared most of its parts with a plain Plymouth Volare. The real muscle had faded, replaced by soft seats and fake toughness. Even the handling was sloppy. Try to take a sharp turn, and you'd feel like you were driving a sofa. Buyers noticed. In its first years, Roadrunners sold by the thousands, but by 1978, fewer than 2,000 people wanted one. Even with rare options like a T-bar roof and special paint, it couldn't hide what it really was, a car pretending to be something it wasn't. Some say it's special, but being rare doesn't always mean being good. This Roadrunner came from a time when rules and gas prices changed cars forever. The muscle cars became weak, and no decals could save them. What was left behind was a heavy shell with a fading echo of the past. Number 13, 1976 Chevrolet Camaro. The 1976 Chevrolet Camaro had wide fenders, a low stance, and that long hood shape that made people turn their heads. But once you looked past the style, there wasn't much muscle under the surface. The standard engine was a small six-cylinder, just 250 cubic inches. It didn't growl, it didn't roar, it barely moved. Even the new V8, which was 305 cubic inches, only made 140 horsepower. That number might sound okay, but for a car that looked like a racer, it felt like a disappointment. The biggest engine, 350 cubic inches, gave just 165 horsepower. That still wasn't enough to make this heavy car feel fast. You could push your foot to the floor and feel nothing much. Chevrolet added power brakes for all V8 models that year. That helped with stopping, but not with speed. No matter how shiny the paint or how wide the tires, the performance wasn't there. Even with 10 new colors and extra options like air conditioning or automatic transmissions, the heart of the car stayed weak. Most buyers picked the Sport Coupe version. More than 92,000 were made. That made it common, too common. With so many out there, prices dropped, and over time, rust and wear hit hard. Whether it had a manual stick or an automatic shifter, the results were the same. A worn-down car that couldn't keep up. Number 12, 1975 Pontiac Firebird. The 1975 Pontiac Firebird proved in the worst way that looking fast and being fast are two very different things. It had a wide stance, a sloped nose, and a rear window that now curved along the sides. It looked stylish from the outside, but deep down, it had lost its strength. The powerful engines that once made the Firebird special were gone. No more Super Duty motor, no more big 400 turbo hydromatic transmission. What drivers got instead was a smaller, lighter 350 automatic. It worked, sure, but it didn't bring excitement. Then came the new engine block, called 500557. It had less metal and less nickel inside. That made it cheaper and easier to build, but also easier to crack. It was not the kind of engine you wanted in a car that was once a legend on the street. Even the so-called high-output engine didn't live up to its name. It was a 455 cubic inch V8, but Pontiac stuffed it with soft parts and a tight exhaust. It only made 200 horsepower. That was barely enough to move the heavy Firebird with any real energy. To make things worse, the body lost its old sharp lines. The new shape looked smooth, but didn't help the car drive better. The big glass in the back might have looked fancy, but it added more weight and did nothing for speed. And here's what really mattered. This Firebird couldn't even keep up with slower cars from years before. It took more than 16 seconds just to run a quarter mile. That's not muscle, that's disappointment. Number 11, 1978 AMC Matador. In the final days of the muscle car era, some cars faded quietly. The 1978 AMC Matador looked like it wanted to impress, with soft fabric seats and shiny fake wood in the wagons. But once the doors shut and the engine turned on, it became clear. This car had problems. It all started under the hood. The base engine was a 258 cubic inch inline six-cylinder. It made only 120 horsepower. That's barely enough to move a car of this size with confidence. If drivers wanted more, they could step up to a 360 cubic inch V8, but that only gave them 140 horsepower. Still not enough to make the car feel fast. It had some torque, but the power just wasn't there. Inside, it felt like a throwback. A basic radio, plain switches, and not much else. Sure, there was vinyl on the wagons and soft seats, but nothing felt modern. By the time this car was rolling off the line, it was already behind. Sales told the rest of the story. They dropped by 2/3 compared to the year before. Buyers walked away, and the ones who stayed didn't always know what they were getting. Some cars came with floor shifters, others had the gear stick on the steering column. Some had bucket seats, and others had long bench seats. It all felt random, like the people building the car couldn't make up their minds. Then there was the coupe. It tried to look elegant and sporty, but the long doors, frameless windows, and strange nose gave it an odd look. It didn't match the sedan or the wagon. The whole thing felt off. Number 10. 1976 Dodge Aspen RT. The 1976 Dodge Aspen RT is one of those cars that fell apart fast. From the outside, it wore stripes and badges like a true muscle machine. But under the hood and behind the wheel, things didn't feel right. The problem started early. The car was rushed into dealerships, and it showed. The front fenders rusted quickly, even in places with little rain. Paint came off like old stickers. It wasn't just about looks either. Safety became a real concern. The front suspension could fail if the brakes were pushed hard. Fuel lines sometimes rubbed against moving belts, which could lead to fires. Some seat belts even popped open during hard stops. Now that's not muscle, that's risky. And the issues kept coming. Battery acid sometimes leaked and ate through brake lines. That meant slow, weak stops. Then came the worst part, stalling. The Aspen RT had a habit of shutting off while in traffic. That left drivers scared and stuck in the middle of the road. Even the engine options didn't help much. The base model came with a 225 cubic inch slant 6. Buyers could move up to a 318 or a 360 cubic inch V8, but even the largest engines struggled to make the car feel fast. The sound was there, but the power wasn't. The design was also confused. The Aspen tried to be new, but most of its parts came from old cars. The coupe sat on a 108.7-inch wheelbase. The sedan and wagon were longer, at 112.7 inches, but none of them drove smoothly. Bumps felt sharp, the steering felt loose, and the final blow? Over 1 million Aspens were recalled within a year. That's not a strong car. That's just a big mistake with racing stripes. Number 9. 1975 Ford Torino. The 1975 Ford Torino looked tough on the outside, but the magic was long gone. A few small changes were made, like a new grille, but everything else stayed the same. And that was the problem. Everything felt stuck in the past. What really hurt the Torino was what happened under the hood. To follow the new clean air laws, Ford added a part called a catalytic converter. That might have helped the environment, but it didn't help the engine. The power dropped a lot. The car became heavier too, which made it slower and harder to enjoy. Imagine trying to race while carrying a backpack full of bricks. That's what it felt like behind the wheel. The engines didn't make things better. Buyers had to choose between two versions of the 351 cubic inch engine, one called the M and one called the W. But neither had much muscle left. And the real letdown? No more manual shifting. Every single Torino came with the same automatic transmission. That took away the fun for anyone who loved to feel the car's power with each gear change. Ford tried to add comfort by making power steering and brakes standard. But those upgrades couldn't fix the car's heavy, clumsy feel. Even the Gran Torino Sport, once a standout model, now looked just like every other version. It no longer turned heads or raised excitement. People noticed. Sales dropped to under 200,000 that year. That was a huge drop for a car that once filled roads. The Torino had become a big car in a world that was starting to want smaller, smarter, and more fun rides. Number 8. 1979 Chevrolet Malibu Classic. Back in the late 1970s, cars were changing. The 1979 Chevrolet Malibu Classic, on the outside, looked nice with bright chrome, smooth lines, and a soft Landau top that tried to scream fancy. But under all that shine, there was not much power to be proud of. Under the hood sat a 305 cubic inch V8 engine. That might sound strong, but it really wasn't. It had only a small 4-barrel carburetor, which meant the engine didn't get much air or fuel to work with. It was paired with a slow, 3-speed automatic transmission, and the rear gears were made for calm cruising, not quick speeds. The 2.29 gear ratio made the car feel tired every time the gas pedal was pressed. Inside, the Malibu tried to look nice. Black vinyl seats, a dash with fake wood trim, and a steering wheel with cruise buttons made it feel almost modern for the time. But it was all just for show. The plastic, the basic dials, and the plain layout didn't bring any real joy to driving. Sure, it had a tape player and even a CD changer in the trunk later on, but none of that made the ride feel exciting. Underneath, the story stayed the same. The frame was strong, but the brakes in the back were still drum style, not disc. The car had power steering and power brakes, but the handling was soft. The ride was floaty, and it leaned too much in corners. Even the sound of the car was quiet. Dual exhaust couldn't make it dominate. It was just a slow, quiet ride that never made a mark. Number 7, 1976 Pontiac Ventura. Back in 1976, the Pontiac Ventura tried to look fresh with clean lines, a sharp grille, and a smooth shape, which gave it a neat look. But once you got past the surface, things started to fall apart, especially if you were hoping for a real muscle car. First, let's talk power. The engines were the biggest letdown. The base engine was a 231 cubic inch V6, and while it sounded fair, it was slow and tired. Want more power? The optional 260 cubic inch V8 barely made a difference. There were even larger options, like the 305 and the 301 cubic inch V8s, but somehow the car still felt like it was dragging its feet. Some unlucky versions even came with a 152 cubic inch Iron Duke 4-cylinder engine. That one sipped gas, sure, but it also sipped all the fun. There was a 5-speed manual transmission offered with the V8, which sounds exciting. But here's the truth. Fewer than 700 cars ever had it. So even when the car had a chance to be special, barely anyone gave it a shot. And now finding parts for that setup is like chasing a ghost. The Ventura rode on the same frame as the Chevrolet Nova, but it didn't get any of the thrill. The handling was soft, the steering was loose, and the brakes felt like they needed a nap. Inside, things looked plain. The seats, the trim, even the dashboard, all average. Nothing made you say, wow. Some versions had air conditioning and an AM/FM radio, but that wasn't rare in the mid-70s. Number 6, 1978 Plymouth Volare Roadrunner. The 1978 Plymouth Volare Roadrunner was just pretending to be tough. With its bold stripes, shiny badges, and sporty bucket seats, it tried hard to copy the real muscle cars from years before. But under the surface, it was more family car than street racer. This Roadrunner shared its base with the Dodge Aspen, a plain car built for quiet drives, not thrilling ones. Even the so-called performance model came with a small 318 cubic inch V8 engine. It sounded good on paper, but in real life, it was weak and slow. Compared to the roaring Roadrunners of the late 1960s, this version was a big letdown. Speaking of power, there was a bigger 360 cubic inch engine offered too, but it was rare and still didn't have much bite. It only made 170 horsepower, not nearly enough for a car that looked like it should fly. The steering was slow, the ride was soft, and the handling felt sleepy. Worse than the speed was the quality. These cars rusted fast. Metal faded, paint peeled, and parts wore out early. Doors creaked, dashboards cracked, and seats got tired long before they should have. Also, fuel economy didn't help either. Even with a smaller engine, the Roadrunner drank gas quickly and still needed regular fuel. It wasn't smart for daily driving or long trips. Beyond this, there were the numbers. Over 1 million Volares were sold, but only a few were Roadrunners. Most drivers skipped it, and for good reason. It didn't offer the thrill of a true muscle car, just the outfit of one. Number 5, 1977 Chevrolet Monza Mirage. The 1977 Chevrolet Monza Mirage came dressed like a race car. It wore wide red and blue stripes, had big flared fenders, and even a spoiler in the back. But once the engine started, all the excitement faded away. This car had a 305 cubic inch V8 engine. That sounds like something powerful, but it wasn't. The engine struggled to move the heavy body. The 4-speed manual transmission helped a little, but it still felt slow. Pressing the gas didn't bring thunder. It brought noise and waiting. Moreover, the Mirage was made for only 1 year. General Motors worked with another company to add all those race-like body parts. They weren't metal, they were plastic. And while they looked cool at first, they didn't hold up well over time. The paint faded, the stickers peeled, the edges cracked. Speaking of interior, the car was just as full of big ideas with small results. Red vinyl seats looked bright, but felt stiff. The dashboard was simple and plain. It didn't have fancy gauges or clever touches. The whole thing felt rushed, like it was made to look fun, but not built to last. Beyond this, the Monza Mirage was based on the same body as the Vega, a car known for trouble. Even with its better suspension and fatter tires, the Mirage still handled like an old compact. It bounced too much on rough roads and squeaked around corners. The parts weren't strong, and rust came quickly unless the car was kept inside. So it looked ready for the racetrack but was better suited for a parking lot. Number 4. 1973 Dodge Dart Sport. The 1973 Dodge Dart Sport came with a bulging hood scoop, racing stripes, and a name that promised speed. But once you got behind the wheel, that promise faded fast. This Dart came with a 340 cubic inch V8 engine, which sounds exciting, but thanks to heavy emissions rules and a bulky build, it didn't move like a real muscle car. The power was there somewhere, but getting to it felt slow and stiff. It didn't jump off the line or roar down the road. Instead, it felt heavy and tired, even when brand new. Inside, it was just as plain. The bucket seats looked sporty, but weren't very comfortable. The radio worked, sure, but there wasn't much else to make it feel special. It had a basic dash, simple knobs, and little to no style inside. You'd expect more from something wearing a scoop and stripes. One of the biggest letdowns was how quickly these cars aged. Paint faded fast. Parts rusted unless the car was locked away in a perfect garage. Many owners saw cracks in the dash, soft floors from moisture, and rust creeping along the fenders. Even with low miles, these cars needed lots of work just to stay running. The Dart Sport also came with something called the Direct Connection Package, full of race-ready parts and manuals. But very few people used them. Most were just left in boxes, and the cars stayed stock, slow, and forgotten. Number 3. 1975 Mercury Montego MX Brougham. The 1975 Mercury Montego MX Brougham, with a long body, a shiny grille, and a soft vinyl roof, promised comfort and class. But this big car had very little to show. Under the cover, it offered a V8 engine. That sounds strong, but the size of the car made it slow to move. Even with the gas pedal pushed all the way down, it felt heavy and sleepy. It could barely hit 60 miles per hour in under 10 seconds. And that was on a good day with no passengers or hills. Additionally, the ride was soft, but not in a good way. The suspension floated too much, and every bump made the car bounce. On tight turns, it leaned like a boat in water. Power steering helped, but it still felt more like driving a couch than a muscle car. Beyond this, the Montego had a wide bench seat, plastic wood on the dash, and a lot of soft vinyl. Air conditioning was an option, but not always cold. The radio worked if you were lucky. It looked nice at first, but it wore out quickly, and the parts didn't hold up well over time. Plus, gas mileage was awful. One short trip could drain the tank. In the middle of the 1970s gas crisis, this was a big problem. Owners spent more time filling up than enjoying the drive. Even though it once led a race as a pace car, that didn't make it fast. Number 2. 1976 Chrysler Cordoba. The 1976 Chrysler Cordoba, a fanciest muscle car, had long doors, shiny chrome, and soft seats that were called Corinthian leather. That name sounded special, like something from a faraway land. But it was not from Greece, it was just regular vinyl made in New Jersey. Well, this car was big. It stretched across the street like a giant sofa on wheels. But for all its size, it did not go fast. The big engine, a 400 cubic inch V8, only made 185 horsepower. That might sound like a lot, but the car weighed so much that it moved slowly and drank fuel like it was thirsty all the time. The interesting part is that the Cordoba shared its bones with smaller, older Dodges from the early 1960s. By 1976, those same bones had been stuffed into a bigger suit. The ride felt soft, but too soft. It leaned in turns, floated over bumps, and made sharp driving feel like a chore. The inside looked nice at first. The gauges were clean, the dash was neat, and the radio worked. But even the seats, with all their fancy names, didn't feel as special as promised. They were just regular padded vinyl, dressed up with words. Even though it tried to act like a muscle car, the Cordoba was more about show than go. The fake leather, slow engine, and heavy frame made it feel more like a tired cruiser than a real muscle machine. Number 1. 1976 Pontiac Sunbird. In the end, the 1976 Pontiac Sunbird promised fun and power, like a real muscle car in a small package. But that promise faded fast once the wheels started turning. Now let's talk about the engine. It had enough torque to move the car, but not enough to excite anyone. It was quiet, slow, and ran out of breath before it could reach high speeds. The engine made noise, but not the kind you'd cheer for. Further, the Sunbird came with a 5-speed manual, which sounded exciting, but it didn't help much. The gears felt heavy, and the car's rear axle was geared for fuel savings, not speed. Shifting through the gears didn't make the car faster. It just made you more tired. Even with good tires and some extra suspension parts, the Sunbird handled corners like a nervous deer. It understeered through turns, and on country roads, it felt unsure of itself. The brakes were okay, but the whole car felt out of balance, too heavy, too soft, and not enough power. Inside, the car looked neat and clean. It had space and comfort, with a smart-looking dashboard and good visibility. But that didn't make up for the way it drove. The Sunbird had the look, but not the spirit. Like a picture that seems real from far away, but up close, the details didn't match the promise.
And just when the 70s hit rock bottom, the 1980s said, "Hold my wrench." The next 20 machines show how bad styling, weak engines, and cost-cutting could really get.
The 1980s may have been the decade that kept the muscle car dream alive, but not every machine from that era aged like fine wine. But some of these cars turned out to be bad deals, and in 2025, they're just not worth buying. Number 20, 1980 Dodge Aspen RT. If you are thinking about buying an old car today, do not waste your money on the 1980 Dodge Aspen RT. Back in the day, people thought it might be cool, but soon they found out it was full of problems. Today, it is just a bad car to own. The biggest problem? Rust. The Aspen RT rusted very fast. In places with rain, snow, or salty roads, the metal started to break down. The body would flake, and the parts underneath would rot. This was not just ugly, it was dangerous. Fixing the rust cost a lot of money, and many people gave up trying. The car also drove badly. It came with the Slant 6 engine. That engine was known to last a long time, but it was not strong or fast. It was a 225 cubic inch 6-cylinder engine that felt very weak. When you pressed the yay, it barely moved. The engine and the automatic transmission also acted strangely. It was like the car did not want to go. The inside was not much better. Yes, it had power windows and locks, but the seats were not comfortable. The inside felt cheap. After some time, the dashboard cracked, the doors squeaked, and parts started to fall apart. It did not feel like a car made with care. It felt like a car made from leftover parts. Even the outside was boring. It had a plain, boxy shape. While other cars from the 80s looked fun and exciting, the Aspen RT looked like a dull brick on wheels. And then there were the recalls. The company had to fix many parts. That means too many things were wrong. In the end, this car is not fun, not fast, and not worth your money today. Number 19, 1980, Chevrolet Monza. The 1980 Chevrolet Monza is a big letdown. Almost everything about it is weak, slow, or just plain disappointing. Let's start with the power. The base model came with a tiny 151 cubic inch 4-cylinder engine that only made 87 horsepower. That's barely enough to move a car, let alone one pretending to be sporty. If you wanted more power, the V8 option gave you just 110 horsepower. Even worse, the California version had a big 350 cubic inch V8, but it only made 125 horsepower. That's not muscle, that's a snooze. And when it came to moving fast, forget it. The V8 version took more than 12 seconds just to reach 60 miles per hour. Its main rival, the Ford Mustang II, did it in under 10 seconds. The Monza's quarter-mile time was a slow 19 seconds flat. Drivers wanted fun and speed, but instead got stuck with a car that felt lazy and dull. Additionally, steering and handling didn't help either. Even though it was light, the Monza didn't like turns. It felt floaty and hard to control, especially on twisty roads. The suspension and steering were not sharp at all. It had four-wheel disc brakes, which sounded good, but they couldn't save the driving experience from feeling sloppy. Looks didn't win anyone over either. It came as a two-door coupe or a three-door hatchback, but neither version looked exciting. Big plastic bumpers made it look bulky and cheap. The cabin used basic materials that felt rough and dull, with nothing special to enjoy or remember. Chevrolet had big plans for a rotary engine, but that never happened. Instead, they stuck the Monza with weak engines and leftover parts from the Chevrolet Vega, another failure. All that effort, and the Monza still couldn't keep up. Number 18, 1980 Buick Century Turbo Coupe. Back in the late 1970s, Buick tried something bold with the Century Turbo Coupe. What they got instead was a strange mix of awkward design, missed chances, and flashy graphics that couldn't save the car. Under the sharp, fastback shape was a 232 cubic inch V6 engine with a single turbocharger and one 4-barrel carburetor. That setup gave it 175 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque. But with no manual transmission offered, it never felt exciting to drive. Buick left all the fun out of a car that really needed some. It did weigh just over 3,051 pounds, which helped it move better than expected, but not enough to impress buyers. Its closest rivals still had more power and better performance. Even the base 1979 Chevrolet Corvette was quicker and sounded far better doing it. However, from the bird sticker on the fender to the giant Turbo Coupe label on the back, the look screamed for attention. But bucket seats and a sports steering wheel weren't enough to match the promises the body made. Number 17, 1981 Dodge Mirada CMX. Never heard of the 1981 Dodge Mirada CMX? You're not the only one. And if you're thinking about buying one today, don't. This forgotten car from the 80s is one of the worst choices you could make. The Mirada CMX tried to mix muscle and luxury, but it failed at both. It had shiny chrome, a vinyl top, and even a leather steering wheel. Some even had glass T-tops, which looked cool, but that's where the fun ended. Once you drove it, the magic disappeared fast. Under the hood, it had a 318 cubic inch V8 engine. Sounds strong? Not at all. It only made about 130 horsepower. That's not nearly enough for a car this heavy. It was super slow. Hit the ground, and instead of a roar, you got a sad groan. It was like watching a tired turtle climb a hill. Then, the 3-speed automatic transmission, called Torque Flight, was just okay. Nothing fancy. You could get the shifter on the steering column or the center console, depending on the seat setup. Bucket seats gave you a brushed aluminum dashboard. But if you had a bench seat, you got fake wood trim that looked cheap and fake. Outside, it had a long nose and a short rear, kind of like a Cadillac Seville. But the front grille looked weird, almost like an old car from the 1930s. Even the sporty CMX model couldn't hide its clunky style. It wanted to look fast, but it just looked confused. Dodge even asked Richard Petty to race it, but it was so bad in the wind tunnel that it was 8 miles per hour slower than others. Sales dropped fast from about 27,000 to only 5,000 by 1983. Today, it's slow, awkward, and totally worthless. Number 16, 1980 Pontiac Firebird Turbo Trans Am. The 1980 Pontiac Firebird Turbo Trans Am was hiding a lot of problems under all that muscle. This car kept a big, heavy body weighing 3,700 pounds, but came with a small 302 cubic inch V8 engine though Pontiac called it a 301 to sound better. That engine was really meant for slow station wagons, not for a sporty ride. To add speed, Pontiac gave it a turbocharger. Sounds exciting, but it caused more trouble than it solved. The turbo gave 9 pounds per square inch of boost, which was a lot for regular 91-octane fuel. To stop the engine from braking, they added a knock sensor system that would pull back the spark timing. That made the engine weaker, not stronger. To protect the engine more, they dropped the compression ratio down to 7.5 to 1. Even with stronger parts like thicker bolts and special pistons, the power still felt flat. The engine didn't deliver smooth, strong power. It felt like a normal 350 cubic inch motor trying hard to pull a heavy load and failing. It didn't even have a boost gauge or a warning light, so drivers never knew when the turbo kicked in. The sound was just like the old quiet V8 with a catalytic converter. There was no thrill, no whine, no kick. The turbo's boost ended at 4,000 revolutions per minute. After that, the power dropped fast. It took 8.2 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour and 16.7 seconds for the quarter mile. That was slower than the 1979 version by 1.5 seconds. Even the top speed dropped to 116 miles per hour. Worse, the turbo only came with an automatic transmission. The manual option? A weak 3-speed paired with a small V6. Sure, the brakes were strong and handling parts worked well, but the heart of the car just wasn't there anymore. Number 15, 1983 Dodge Rampage. The 1983 Dodge Rampage. This car seems like a good idea at first, until you actually try to use it. Because once you got behind the wheel, things went downhill fast. The Rampage had 2 doors, a little truck bed, and a low nose that copied the Dodge Omni. But it sat so low to the ground, you had to drop into it, not climb. Trying to load heavy stuff into the back felt more like a workout. And that small bed, it could barely carry tools or gear. It looked like a truck but worked like a toy. Under the cover, it had a 135 cubic inch engine. Depending on the version, it made between 83 and 96 horsepower. That was not enough. It took 10 seconds just to reach 60 miles per hour. And if you tried to tow anything, the engine groaned like it was ready to quit. Step into the cabin and things got worse. It was full of cheap plastic, strange knobs, and controls that made no sense. One lock worked like a bottle cap. Red carpets and striped seats faded fast in the sun and fell apart over time. Additionally, it had front-wheel drive, which was fine in the rain, but didn't feel like a real truck. Dodge bragged about its colors and smooth ride, but nobody was fooled. Sales in 1983 were under 17,000. Even Richard Petty didn't touch it. That says it all. Number 14, 1980 Cadillac Seville Elegante, diesel V8. The 1980 Cadillac Seville Elegante diesel was more show than go, and today, that makes it a heavy and clumsy relic. Not a ride worth reviving. Start with the weight. This thing came in at over 4,200 pounds, packed with metal, insulation, and gimmicks. But its 350 cubic inch diesel engine made just 105 horsepower. That's not enough muscle to move a beast this size with any confidence. Push the pedal, and all you get is noise and a slow crawl. At 70 miles per hour, it would rather take a nap than speed up. The quiet cabin helped hide the truth. Around town, it floated like a cloud, but get it on a highway and wind whistled through the A-pillar. At 75 miles per hour, the car groaned like it had been pushed too far. And then there were the gadgets, dozens of them. Automatic dimming lights, power everything, temperature buttons, CB radio, even a console made for 8-track tapes. But all those buttons and gizmos couldn't distract from weak steering, a stiff throttle, and poor road feel. Even the design was confusing. The steep front, mixed with a hunchback trunk, looked like 3 different cars glued together. Inside, odd trims didn't quite fit, and stitching stuck out in strange places. Yes, it had glow plugs for fast cold starts, but what good is quick starting when the car barely moves once it's running? So, this Seville is best left where it belongs, in old magazine pages. Number 13, 1986 Dodge Lancer Shelby. The 1986 Dodge Lancer Shelby is a complete letdown and one of the worst cars you could buy today. Let's talk about that turbo engine. It had a 135 cubic inch turbocharged engine. Sounds cool, right? But it broke a lot. The turbo would overheat and lose power. Sometimes it made the car feel tired and slow. It also had something called multi-port fuel injection. That sounded high-tech back then, but it caused more trouble than it was worth. The fuel injectors got clogged and the car wouldn't run right. Then came the biggest nightmare, the head gasket. This important part keeps the engine sealed and running smoothly, but in the Lancer Shelby it failed again and again. When that happened, the engine overheated and sometimes got ruined. It was costly to fix and left many owners angry and stuck. Some buyers chose a different engine, a 158 cubic inch version. That was even worse. It needed constant care. Oil changes, spark plugs, and timing belt checks were a must. If you skipped any of those, the engine could quit on you. Many drivers didn't know that, and their engines gave up way too soon. Even if the engine worked, the inside of the car felt cheap. Plastic parts rattled and squeaked. Buttons came loose. Air vents snapped. Some people even had to use tape to keep things together. Outside, things didn't get better. In cold places with salty roads, the car rusted fast. The metal around the wheels and doors turned brown and flaky. It looked bad and made the car weaker. And for fuel, it drank it like a truck. City driving was the worst. Number 12, 1985 Chevrolet Citation X11. The 1985 Chevrolet Citation X11 turned out to be a confusing mess. It tried to mix old parts with new ideas, and the result was full of problems. Start with the ride. It was rough. The suspension was old-fashioned and made every bump feel worse. Then came torque steer. When you stepped on the gas, the steering wheel pulled hard to one side. It was never fully fixed, and it made driving feel awkward and sometimes even unsafe. Now let's talk about the power. You had two engine choices. One was a 170 cubic inch V6 that made 115 horsepower. The other was a 152 cubic inch four-cylinder with only 90 horsepower. Even with some tuning in the X11 version, it was still slow compared to real performance cars. It took about 9 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. Not terrible, but far from exciting. The look didn't help much either. It came in two-door versions only, either a sedan or a hatchback coupe. The two-door sedan looked strange and not sporty. The hatchback looked better, but still couldn't shake the bad image. Chevrolet added sporty touches like special graphics, blackout trim, a rear spoiler, and 14-inch wheels. But those were just dress-up parts. And then came the real trouble, build quality. The early Chevrolet Citations had poor fit and finish. Parts didn't line up well. Things felt cheap. People complained about many little problems, from loose parts to bad workmanship. Chevrolet rushed production to meet demand, and it showed. Number 11, 1982 Chevrolet Camaro Iron Duke. The 1982 Chevrolet Camaro Iron Duke is one of those cars that wear a powerful badge but carry nothing behind it. Chevrolet gave this third-generation Camaro a full redesign. They made it 450 pounds lighter, hoping it would be quicker and sharper. But none of that mattered once they dropped in the 153 cubic inch four-cylinder engine. That engine made just 90 horsepower, an amount more fitting for a lawn tractor than a muscle car. To make things worse, it came with a 3-speed automatic transmission. The result? It took nearly 20 seconds just to reach 60 miles per hour. That is not just slow, it is painfully slow. Even a school bus could pull ahead with ease. For a car meant to turn heads, this version only turned them in confusion. Buyers saw through it. Only 15% of all Camaro customers picked this weak engine. Most people went for the later IROC Z model, which had a much stronger 348 cubic inch V8 engine making 170 horsepower, almost double the power of the Iron Duke. By 1985, Chevrolet got the message and moved on to better engines, leaving this mistake behind. No matter how fresh the shape looked, the Iron Duke dragged it down. Number 10, 1980 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am Turbo. When a car promises thunder but delivers a tired whisper, it leaves more than just tire marks. It leaves disappointment. The 1980 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am Turbo is a perfect case. Weighing 3,700 pounds, this Firebird carried a small 301 cubic inch V8 engine. That engine was meant for station wagons, not for something wearing a flaming bird on its nose. Pontiac added a turbocharger to reach 205 horsepower, but it only made things worse. The turbo setup pushed boost pressure to 9 pounds per square inch, but instead of speed, it gave problems. The engine was not made to handle the pressure. To protect it, Pontiac had to install complicated electronics that constantly pulled back spark timing. That means just when the car needed strength, it lost it. Even the feel behind the wheel was underwhelming. The car didn't roar or surge forward. Instead, it acted like any average old V8. Pontiac even worked to make the turbo silent. No whoosh, no thrill, just dull hums. In numbers, the letdowns were clear. 0 to 60 miles per hour took 8.2 seconds. A quarter-mile run was 16.7 seconds at 86 miles per hour. Compared to the old 400 cubic inch Trans Am, it was 1.5 seconds slower and 10 miles per hour behind on top speed. After 4,000 revolutions per minute, the power simply faded. It was best left in automatic mode. Manual shifting made no difference. This turbo dream burned out long before the finish line. Number 9, 1984 Pontiac Fiero. Next up, some cars are all talk and no drive, and the 1984 Pontiac Fiero is a perfect example. It came with sporty dreams, but what it delivered was smoke. Yes, literally. Here's the biggest problem: engine fires. The Fiero's engine was known for overheating and bursting into flames. It had a low-capacity oil pan, which often caused oil starvation. That led to overheating and damaged connecting rods. And when those rods broke, oil leaked straight onto the hot exhaust, and the result was only flames under the rear hatch. By the end of 1985, there were 112 fire reports, most from the 1984 version. And it gets worse. The car's electric panel was placed dangerously close to the exhaust manifold, making the fire risk even higher. That's like putting a matchbox next to a campfire and hoping for the best. The trouble didn't stop with the heat. The Fiero had manual steering, which made slow-speed driving a chore. It was meant to be a commuter car, but traffic felt like a gym workout. With the engine in the back and a light body, it was hard to keep steady when weaving through city streets. Then there's space, or the lack of it. There was little room for people or things. Talk about speed, the four-cylinder engine needed about 11 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. Even the stronger V6 version didn't feel fast. Well, the shape turned heads, but that sharp look didn't match its weak performance. Fires, flaws, and frustrating drives defined the Fiero. Number 8, 1989 Dodge Shadow ES. The 1989 Dodge Shadow ES was packed with the problems. And once you drive it, the truth hits hard. Let's begin with the outside. It looked like it had a trunk, but it didn't. It was a hatchback with glass that didn't even open. Dodge called it hidden hatchback versatility, but it just confused everyone. The hatch wasn't strong either. Some would stop working in winter, leaving your groceries rolling around in the back seat. Under the hood, it had a 152 cubic inch turbo engine making 150 horsepower. But the turbo would heat up quickly and the car would lose power or even stall. And the 5-speed manual transmission, it felt rough and clunky, like shifting a lawnmower. Drivers had to fight the gear stick just to change gears. Brakes were another big problem. Some Shadow ES models had 4-wheel disc brakes, but they wore out fast. Worse, the back wheels could lock up during hard stops. That's not just bad, it's dangerous. Inside the car, Dodge tried to be fancy with features like power windows, cruise control, and a sunroof, but most of these broke after a few years. Buttons stopped working, windows got stuck, door locks jammed, even the light package, with lights in the glove box and trunk, didn't last. The dashboard had a vacuum and boost gauge, but hardly anyone understood it. The message center gave false alerts, blinking lights that made no sense. Not only this, but the build quality was awful. The car rattled on bumpy roads, plastic parts cracked, seats wore out, and the steering wheel felt cheap. The motorized seat belts added in 1994 were noisy, slow, and broke often. Number 7, 1980 Corvette 305, California. The 1980 Corvette 305 California was made only for California because of strict pollution laws. This version of the Corvette came with a smaller engine, a 305 cubic inch V8. That engine made just 180 horsepower. For a Corvette, that was a huge disappointment. Worse still, this engine was matched with a slow 3-speed automatic transmission. That combo made the car feel sluggish. It didn't take off with power. It crept forward like a fast scooter. This was a Corvette in name only, missing the speed and muscle that made earlier models famous. It never left California. That means it likely stayed away from bad weather, but it also didn't live the fast life a Corvette should. It became more of a pretty face than a performer. It had a shiny burgundy color all around, cool T-tops you could remove, and even fresh 18-inch aluminum wheels with wide tires. But no matter how sharp it looked, none of that helped it drive any better. Even though it kept its original engine and transmission, that didn't make the car special. The small engine and weak transmission kept it far behind other muscle cars of its time. There was no thrill, no roar, just quiet disappointment. Chevrolet had no real choice. They had to make a version that fit California's rules. But for fans who expected power and performance, this Corvette came up empty. It lost its strong reputation, and with it, everything that made the name Corvette exciting. Number 6, 1981 Mercury Capri Turbo RS. The 1981 Mercury Capri Turbo RS rolled out with more groans than glory. It had cool touches like a sharp front end and shiny alloy wheels. But once you got past the face, things fell apart fast. One of the biggest head scratchers? No standard air conditioning. On a warm day, the only relief came from rolling down the windows. That meant noise, wind, and sweat. Not exactly the comfort buyers expected in the early 1980s. Then came the real letdown: power. The base engine was a 140 cubic inch 4-cylinder that made just 88 horsepower. Slow was an understatement. Even the 200 cubic inch 6-cylinder engine didn't do much better. And the so-called turbo version? Still based on that tiny 4-cylinder and still slow. It used a carburetor instead of fuel injection, so it felt old and clunky right out of the gate. Looks didn't help either. The body was square and bulky, with a thick C-pillar and oversized doors that gave it a heavy feel. The shiny trim around the windows made it look even more dated. It resembled the Ford Mustang, but without the Mustang's charm, speed, or fan base. There was some extra space in the back for tall items, which helped a little. But no one bought a sporty coupe just for vertical trunk room. By the mid-80s, most buyers gave up on the Capri. Sales dropped, and in 1986, Mercury pulled the plug. What started with a promise ended in disappointment. The Mercury Capri Turbo RS never found its stride. It just lagged behind. Puffing out promises it. Number 5, 1980 Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The 1980 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, one of the biggest problems was its TH200 automatic transmission. When matched with the 231 cubic inch V6 engine, that transmission had a bad habit of failing early. This made the car unreliable and frustrating to own. Now about that engine. It had a turbocharged V6 borrowed from the Buick Riviera, so when you hit the gas from a stop, it didn't move quickly. There was a small delay that made it feel sleepy instead of sporty, and sometimes the turbo caused pinging or pre-ignition, which made the car run rough. It just wasn't a smooth or well-built setup. Then there was the way the Monte Carlo looked. The style didn't land well with most people. The shape was odd, and it didn't match the performance it promised. Chevrolet even added a bulge to the hood to make space for the turbocharger, but instead of looking powerful, it just looked strange and awkward. Despite this, the seats didn't help the experience. The split bench seats were made of cheap materials and didn't offer much support for your back or sides. The feel was flat and boring. The color scheme? Also plain and dull. Nothing about the layout made the ride more enjoyable. Even though the steering and suspension worked okay, they couldn't save the overall feel. The car stayed quiet on the road, but it felt like it was just floating, not really connected to the driver. And that disconnect made every trip in the Monte Carlo feel less fun, less exciting, and full of missed potential. Number 4, 1981 Pontiac Grand Prix. The 1981 Pontiac Grand Prix's new design was meant to cut down on air drag for better fuel use, but all it really did was make the car look plain and dull. It lost the bold look of the older models and didn't bring any new excitement. Under the hood, things didn't get better. The base engine was a Buick 231 cubic inch V6 that made only 110 horsepower. That's not much power for a car this size. Another choice was a Pontiac-built V8 with 262 cubic inches and just 120 horsepower. Even a 350 cubic inch diesel V8 was an option, but it only made 105 horsepower. No matter which engine you picked, none had the power you'd expect from something wearing the Grand Prix badge. Moreover, the cabin tried to impress with wood grain touches and soft seats, but they didn't fix the weak performance. Some versions came with a rally gauge cluster or a factory CB radio, but these were just small extras. Color options were plain, with names like dark maroon metallic and cameo white. The two-door coupe did offer optional T-tops, which gave a little breeze, but not much excitement. Also, the driving feel was lazy. It could handle bumps, sure, but it didn't corner with any sportiness. The V8 version took about 10 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. That's not thrilling, it's tiring. The exhaust made some noise, but it didn't match the speed. And since it shared so many parts with the Chevrolet Monte Carlo and Buick Regal, it didn't stand out at all. Number 3. 1980 Ford Mustang Cobra. The 1980 Ford Mustang Cobra, under all the stripes and badging, was full of letdowns. First came the shrinking heart under the hood, 255 cubic inch V8 engine. It had less horsepower than the year before, with about 10 horsepower cut away. For a car wearing the Cobra name, that was a big letdown. Then came the 140 cubic inch turbocharged engine. Turbo sounds exciting, right? Not here. It had turbo lag so bad that drivers had to wait and wait before feeling any real push. At low speeds, it felt lazy. Even on the quarter mile, the car dragged itself forward with none of the Mustang magic fans expected. Beyond this, things got worse with reliability. The turbocharged engine had a habit of stalling. Turbochargers failed often, making repairs a constant worry. And the cooling system? That was another mess. It struggled to keep the engine cool. If the radiator or AC condenser got blocked even a little, overheating was right around the corner. You'd think the rest of the car could make up for the trouble, but it didn't. It had Recaro bucket seats, sure, but they were not enough. The rest of the space felt old and didn't match what people hoped for in a sports car. The overall feel just didn't deliver on the Mustang name. Ford tried to give the Cobra life in 1980, but the result was all show and no go. Number 2. 1984 Cadillac Cimarron. The 1984 Cadillac Cimarron promised luxury, but delivered disappointment. It looked almost the same as the much cheaper Chevrolet Cavalier, with just a new grille and Cadillac badges. Now, let's talk power. It started with a 121 cubic inch four-cylinder engine, then later added a 173 cubic inch V6. Neither had much power. The top speed was only about 105 miles per hour, and it took around 13 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. That's way too slow for a Cadillac. Cadillac engineers worked on the suspension, using firmer struts and softer springs. They added anti-roll bars from sportier J cars to help the car handle better. But even with those changes, the ride still didn't feel smooth or high class. The steering and brakes were just average, nothing special. Further, some fancy touches were added, like a power sunroof and an optional Delco GM Bose sound system. That sound system was rare for small cars back then, but it wasn't enough to make a real difference. It came as a four-door sedan in colors like cotillion white and sable black, but those details didn't hide the car's basic roots. Plus, the Cimarron had electronic fuel injection, which was a good feature for its time, but it still used the same engines and transmissions as other J-platform cars, a 4-speed manual or a 3-speed automatic. Nothing unique there. Cadillac hoped younger drivers would buy it, but most buyers were older or already owned Cadillacs. Today, the Cimarron's value is low, between $1,000 and $5,000. The name Cimarron is now mostly remembered for what went wrong. Number 1. 1981 Oldsmobile Omega. The 1981 Oldsmobile Omega was built on the GM X-Body platform, the same one used for the Chevrolet Citation and Pontiac Phoenix, both known for their problems. That already gave the Omega a rough start. Under the surface, it had a Chevrolet 170 cubic inch two-barrel V6 engine with a turbocharger from Japan's Ishikawajima Harima Heavy Industries. It came with upgrades like a larger oil pan, improved exhaust, and a special carburetor. But even with all that, the power still felt low. The engine stayed paired with a slow 3-speed automatic transmission, which made everything feel sluggish and outdated. Some work was done to the suspension, like a thicker 1.25-inch front anti-roll bar and stiffer springs. Still, it used McPherson struts in front and a beam axle with a trailing link in the back. This setup didn't help much. The power rack and pinion steering and front disc brakes with rear drums were mostly standard, so turning and stopping didn't feel sharp or confident. In addition, it tried to look fancy with Recaro bucket seats in black and tan cloth, but the rest of the space felt plain, worn, and cheap. There were a few extra gauges and wiring for racing use, but things like the sagging headliner and tired carpet made it feel unfinished. On the outside, it had a fiberglass front, an air dam, flares, a spoiler, and golden brown paint with race stickers. But the paint looked uneven, and the style felt forced. Later, it was even repainted badly. This car tried to be a pace car, but it never found its pace.
But the downfall didn't stop in the 80s. The 1990s delivered their own batch of 20 muscle cars that aged so poorly, they are outright mistakes in 2025.
In the 1990s, car makers chased style over strength. Some so-called muscle cars looked fast but couldn't outrun a minivan. Today in 2025, these 20 flops prove that not every 90s ride ages like fine wine. Number 20, 1993 Chevrolet Lumina Z34. The Chevrolet Lumina Z34 honestly was all talk and no power. It came with a 207 cubic inch V6 engine that made just 210 horsepower. That might sound decent, but even some regular family cars were quicker. For something sold as a performance machine, this was a major letdown. Handling wasn't much better. It had a sporty suspension, but that didn't mean much. The steering felt vague, and turning corners didn't give the sharp feel drivers expected. It looked like it could handle well, but driving it proved otherwise. The bold body kit and flashy seats only made the disappointment worse. This car tried to look fast, but couldn't deliver the thrill. The seats, while shaped to look like racing seats, were uncomfortable and lacked support. Long drives were tiring, and even short ones weren't very fun. The transmission made things worse. The optional automatic felt lazy, with slow shifts that didn't match the car's sporty image. The standard manual wasn't much of a step up. It felt clunky and unrefined, like something from an older, cheaper car. Despite this, weight was another problem. The Z34 was heavier than many rivals. That extra weight made the engine feel weaker and slowed down acceleration. Cars with less power but lighter frames easily outperformed it. Instead of feeling fast, it just felt heavy and slow, and the public noticed. The car was sold as a performance model, but the market didn't buy the story. Sales stayed low, and it was quickly passed by other cars that had real power, sharp handling, and better performance. The Lumina Z34 ended up as a flashy failure, something that looked exciting but couldn't back it up where it counted. Number 19, 1991 Pontiac Grand Prix GTP. The 1991 Pontiac Grand Prix GTP came with a 207 cubic inch V6 engine that made 210 horsepower. That sounded decent, but on the road it felt flat. There was no real muscle behind it, acceleration was soft, and the power delivery was better suited for daily driving than real performance. The way it was handled didn't help either. Even though this was supposed to be the sportier version of the Grand Prix, it felt heavy and slow to respond. The suspension wasn't built for sharp moves, and cornering felt lazy. You could feel it trying to act like a sports car, but it never really got there. In addition, the area where the driver sat had some flashy tech for the time, like a head-up display and a decent sound system. But those features didn't make up for the lack of performance feel. The seats looked sporty, but didn't give much support. They were better for show than for spirited driving. You didn't feel locked in and ready for action, more like sitting in a dressed-up family car. Transmission choices are another worse feature that makes this car worthless. The automatic was just average, and the manual, which should have been exciting, felt clunky and slow. Gears didn't shift smoothly, and driving became more work than fun. A real muscle car should snap through the gears, not fight back. Even with its tough-looking shape, the Grand Prix GTP never lived up to its image. It looked fast, but didn't drive that way. Compared to other performance cars from the same era, it fell behind quickly. Number 18, 1994 Chevrolet Camaro V6. The 1994 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 brought updates that looked good on paper, But in the real world, they caused more headaches than horsepower. One big change was the switch from the old mechanically controlled 4-speed automatic transmission called the 4L60 to a new electronic version known as the 4L60E. This system also changed the car's computer. In 1993, the engine was managed by an engine control module. In 1994, it had a powertrain control module that handled both the engine and transmission. More control didn't mean better performance, it just meant more things that could go wrong. Another shift came in how the engine measured airflow. The old speed density system used sensors like engine speed and pressure to guess airflow. The newer mass airflow setup used a heated wire to measure the real air coming in. That sounds smarter, but it meant more sensors and more chances for problems. If that wire sensor failed, the whole fueling system got confused. Even tuning the car became more complicated. The 1993 model used a chip that could be removed and swapped out. But the 1994 version had a reflashable chip that required a special plug-in tool under the dashboard. Simple tuning turned into a tech job, not great for the average driver. Next, the gauge cluster got a small style update. The numbers changed from yellow to white. That didn't add any speed, but it tried to look fresh. There was also a spot that read ASR off, which meant for a traction control system. But the system didn't even make it into the car until the next year. It was just a label with no feature behind it. Even though the Z28 had decent speed, 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.7 seconds, it wasn't enough to cover up all the small problems. From new computers to unfinished features, this Camaro was more trouble than thrill. Number 17, 1995 Dodge Avenger ES. The 1995 Dodge Avenger ES tried to replace the old Daytona, but it missed the mark in too many ways. At a quick glance, it had the shape of a sporty coupe, but one drive showed it had none of the muscle to back it up. The V6 engine was a 152 cubic inch engine with 155 horsepower, paired with a 4-speed automatic transmission. It sounded promising, but it moved from 0 to 60 miles per hour in a slow 9.1 seconds. Hardly the performance muscle fans hoped for. Even worse, it lacked power at low speeds. Downshifting felt lazy, and wheel spin never happened. For a car that looked like it was built for fun, the driving feel was more like a quiet sedan. The suspension was firm, and the steering was quick, but that didn't help much when the tires gave up grip in sharp corners. Understeer showed up early, and the best it could manage on the skid pad was 0.80 G, not very sporty at all. Additionally, braking wasn't much better. The ES model came with 4-wheel disc brakes and anti-lock control, but stopping from 70 miles per hour took 190 feet. The bite was decent at first, but the performance didn't stand out. Even the stiff anti-roll bars caused the car to bounce sharply over rough patches of pavement. The cabin was roomy, especially in the back, but the driving position had flaws. Taller drivers found the steering wheel blocked the top of the gauges. Many parts were borrowed straight from the Mitsubishi Eclipse and Eagle Talon, including the dash, controls, and even the doors and windshield. Despite all the features, the car felt bland. Testers struggled to remember anything exciting about the drive. Number 16, 1994 Pontiac Firebird V6. The 1994 Pontiac Firebird V6 had all the flashy style of a muscle car, but none of the real power behind it. Under the long hood sat a 207 cubic inch V6 engine that only made 160 horsepower. That's not nearly enough for a car that looked like it belonged on a racetrack. Even though it had sequential fuel injection, it still felt slow and lazy, more like driving a big turtle than a Firebird. The transmission made things worse. The base model came with a 5-speed manual gearbox, but it was rough and clunky, not smooth or fun at all. There was an optional 4-speed automatic, but that one was carried over from older models and felt sluggish. Getting from 0 to 60 miles per hour took way too long. And during a time when even normal family cars were speeding up, this was a huge letdown. On top of that, the car's body had a modern shape for the 90s, but it was heavy. That weight mixed with the weak engine and slow gear shifts made driving dull. It had rear-wheel drive and independent suspension, but it didn't feel sporty. Instead, it felt like trying to drag a heavy suitcase through tight turns. The driver's area had a strange rounded design. The controls were packed together in the middle and were hard to use while moving. Cheap plastic panels squeaked over bumps, and the cloth seats wore out fast. You could get leather in higher trims, but not with this weak V6 version. Even the safety didn't impress. Dual airbags and anti-lock brakes were there, but no traction control. For newer drivers in bad weather, that made things worse. Number 15, 1993, Ford Mustang. The 1993 Ford Mustang had a strong finish for the Fox body generation, but it showed more signs of being outdated than exciting. Even though Ford switched to cast hyper-eutectic pistons for the 302 cubic inch V8 engine and rated the GT at 205 horsepower with 275 pound-feet of torque, those numbers weren't anything special by the early 90s. That power came after years of small changes, a mass airflow system, camshaft tweaks, but it still didn't feel fresh or fast enough for real muscle car fans. Instead of true upgrades, many changes felt like cost-cutting moves. The rear power window switches in convertible models were removed and moved to the driver's door panel. It was less convenient, especially for backseat passengers. On the LX trims, the black bumper, rub strips, and side moldings were now body-colored. That change was purely cosmetic and did nothing for performance. Not only this, limited edition models also tried to stand out with colors like chrome yellow or vibrant red, along with white leather interiors. But under the paint, nothing changed. The flashy looks didn't make it any faster or more powerful. The SVT Cobra did step things up slightly. It came with the same 302 cubic inch V8, tuned for 235 horsepower and 285 pound-feet of torque. It used GT40 engine parts, but it still didn't deliver the massive leap fans wanted. The Cobra R looked even more serious, with bigger brakes, Coney shocks, oil and power steering coolers, and no back seat, but it used the same engine. No air conditioning or radio either. Fast, but not fun for daily use. By August 26, 1993, the last Fox body Mustang was built. Even the CD player, new as an option, couldn't hide how this platform had run its course. The Mustang barely dodged becoming a front-wheel drive Mazda. It stayed rear-wheel drive, but in its final Fox body year, it was more tired than thrilling. Number 14, 1990 Ford Thunderbird Super Coupe. The 1990 Ford Thunderbird Super Coupe sounded exciting at first. It came with a supercharged 232 cubic inch V6 engine, and that made it seem like a performance star. But it only produced 210 horsepower, which was weaker than the 302 cubic inch V8 found in the Mustang. Even with 315 pound-feet of torque, it still felt slow. The engine ran out of fun after about 4,000 revolutions per minute. It didn't like to rev high, and the power just wasn't thrilling. Talk about handling, the Super Coupe had decent braking and a smooth ride, but it was heavy, really heavy. In tight corners, it leaned and dragged like a big boat. It never felt sharp or quick, and trying to push it hard made the weight even more noticeable. Instead of fun, driving it became a chore. Where you sat didn't help much either. The cabin was more comfortable than some muscle cars, but it lacked energy. The seats were just okay, and the design had no real spark. You didn't feel like you were in something powerful. It felt more like a normal car wearing a sporty badge. Even when drivers tried to upgrade it, the results were weak. Swapping the air filter or changing the pulley gave a little more power, but not enough. It still couldn't compete with better muscle cars from the same era. The changes didn't turn it into anything special. It stayed slow and underwhelming, no matter what you did. The Thunderbird Super Coupe was more promise than performance. For a car built to impress, it fell flat and faded fast. Number 13, 1999 Mercury Cougar. The 1999 Mercury Cougar, people stared when it first rolled down the street. It had sharp lines, modern style, and turned heads, especially younger ones. But that excitement didn't last long. Once folks actually drove it, the truth came out fast. The seats were one of the worst things about it. Even after just a few hundred miles, drivers complained. No matter how much they adjusted, they couldn't get comfortable. The lumbar support stuck out too far, even at the lowest setting. The seat bottom dipped in the middle, making it feel like you were sitting in a hole. Long trips became painful. Some joked it was better to walk than ride in a Cougar for more than an hour. Then there was the engine. It came with a 153 cubic inch V6, On paper, that didn't sound too bad, but in real life, it was strange. At every red light, the engine kept jumping between 2,000 and 3,000 revolutions per minute before finally settling down. It made the car feel like it was always about to break, even though it was just a design flaw. Other cars with the same engine didn't act like that. The controls had issues too. The radio knob was a pain to use. You had to keep turning and turning just to change the volume. The side mirrors, while stylish, were too small and oddly shaped. Seeing what was behind you was tough, which made driving feel unsafe. Things got worse with reliability. One day, the car wouldn't even start. A wiring issue was to blame. It was fixed without charge, but the fear of being stranded never went away. Frequent shop visits became normal, and with high service costs, the Cougar felt more like a problem than a prize. Number 12, 1996 Chevrolet Monte Carlo Z34. The 1995 Chevrolet Monte Carlo tried to carry the muscle car torch, but one of its biggest changes was the move from rear-wheel drive to front-wheel drive. For a car that once competed with the powerful Ford Thunderbird and ruled the NASCAR tracks, this switch took away a lot of its strength. Front-wheel drive might have been fine for regular driving, but it pulled the Monte Carlo away from its muscle roots. Beyond this, it still kept the two-door setup in mid-size shape, but that wasn't enough to bring back the excitement of earlier models. The Monte Carlo once had a proud history. Back in the early days, there was even a rare SS model with a 454 cubic inch V8 engine. That was real muscle. Over time, it downsized, came back with a new SS in 1983, and the final rear-wheel drive models were gone by 1989. But by 1995, everything changed. The styling no longer shouted muscle. It was now a smoother personal coupe meant more for quiet streets than wild turns or roaring engines. Even though it stayed loyal to its coupe shape, the Monte Carlo lost its edge. It was no longer the car that could hold its own on a backstretch or stand out on the boulevard. Also, there was no mention of power that matched its bold name, and nothing in its new design made it exciting for fans of real performance. Instead, it felt more like a family-friendly ride in a muscle car costume. That shift may have fit the times, but it didn't fit what people expected from a Monte Carlo. However, the 1995 model marked the moment when the Monte Carlo left its racing soul behind. What was once a champion turned into just another car, and by today's standards, it simply isn't worth chasing. Number 11, 1994 Dodge Stealth ES. The 1994 Dodge Stealth ES tried to impress with high-tech gear, but most of it didn't help where it really mattered: power and excitement. It had a twin-turbocharged V6 that was said to go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 5 seconds. But numbers were not the whole story. The car was packed with systems that looked cool on paper, but didn't always add real thrill to the drive. One of them was four-wheel steering. Above 35 miles per hour, the rear wheels moved up to 1.5 degrees in the same direction as the front. It was meant to help with turns and highway lane changes, but in practice, the effect was too small to be exciting. Then came the all-wheel drive setup. In the early 90s, very few cars had it in this class, and the Stealth was one of them. But instead of feeling sharp and athletic, it often felt heavy and dull. Even with all four wheels working, the joy of rear-wheel drive was missing. Another flashy idea was the electronically controlled suspension. It offered soft, medium, and hard settings, adjusting to speed, throttle, and braking. But all that clever movement didn't make the car feel any more alive. It felt more like a machine trying to guess your next move than something built for driving passion. It even had a tunable exhaust with tour and sport modes, letting the driver pick how the engine sounded. But that feature quietly vanished after a few years, just like the car's reputation. And while its cousin, the Mitsubishi 3000 GT, got active aero, the Stealth didn't even get that. For all its tricks, the 1994 Dodge Stealth ES just didn't have true muscle where it counted. Number 10, 1995 Ford Probe GT. The 1995 Ford Probe ended up stuck in confusion. Built on a Mazda platform, this coupe tried to stand out, yet kept getting more watered down with every update. That year, Ford removed useful features like the wiring that let you raise the headlights without switching them on. Even the cool, heated mirrors were gone. Then came the trim mess. The SE became its own model, but lost the GT's sporty side skirts and ground effects. The taillights? basic and black outline for SE, barely better red ones for GT. The rear bumper was redesigned, but all it got was a metal 24V badge and a reflector that said GT. Not much of a reward. Even the license plate slot was moved lower, like that would fix anything. Well, Ford tweaked some parts, sure, like the distributor for better reliability and new alloy wheels. But those wheels, only 15-inch 3-spoke ones for SE and swirly 16-inch ones for GT. Not impressive. The cup holders were slightly changed. That says enough. They also took away the graphic equalizer. Yes, even that. Step into the cabin and the confusion continues. 2 interior colors, red and blue, were dropped. All door panels were redesigned as one solid piece, with GT getting a cloth or leather insert just to feel different. The cloth seats came with a new spiderweb pattern that looked more strange than stylish. Overall, the Probe's whole identity was shaky. It was supposed to replace the Mustang, but failed to impress Mustang lovers. With front-wheel drive and no V8, fans turned away. Sales never recovered. Over 8 years, Ford only sold 837,273 units. In its final year, just 32,505 people bought one. That's not muscle, it's a memory best forgotten. Number 9, 1993 Pontiac Sunbird GT. The 1992 Pontiac Sunbird swapped the old 100